Have you ever attacked with a 3/3 Trample Deathtouch, and your opponent double blocks with 2/2/2s, and you both end up staring at each other, wondering what happens next? If so, you need Magic 101, making you an expert without the 10,000 hours. In this episode, we'll firstly go over every evergreen keyword ability plus a few more, and how to deal with them in a vacuum. Then in the second part, we'll cover combat scenarios and how to apply these abilities. First off, let's discuss what a keyword ability actually is. We've all seen them, and it's probably one of the first things we encounter as a new player. But keyword abilities aren't their own type of abilities. It's just a shorthand way of representing another piece of predefined rules text. What I mean is, flying is a static ability that always means this creature can't be blocked unless by creatures with flying and reach. Ward is a triggered ability, which means if you have a wizard with ward and a harmonic prodigy on the battlefield, ward would trigger twice. So let's get right into it and start with our first ability, Deathtouch. It's a static ability that states any amount of damage this creature deals is enough to destroy it. This doesn't just apply to combat damage. If you use Rabid Bite, causing your Noxious Newt to bite a Wall of Omens will then die. Deathtouch is checked as a state-based action, so during the resolution of Rabid Bite, the Wall of Omens will have 1 damage marked against it, and after it finishes resolving and state-based actions are then checked, that's when it dies. I know I told you that we're going to be going over how to deal with creatures with each keyword ability. It's a given that you can use a removal spell or just take the damage, etc. I'm not going to mention that every time. So anyway, to stonewall a Deathtouch creature, you can use a creature with Indestructible, and we'll cover why that works later. You can give a creature protection, and again we'll cover that later. Or kill the creature with a creature that has First Strike or Double Strike. Next up is Defender, another static ability that simply reads, this creature can't attack. Before 2005, this text was tied to the creature type wall. That is no longer the case. Tinderwall, for example, has been errated to have Defender. This means that changelings can attack even though they inherit the wall creature type. As an attacker, to get around a wall, you can either attack with a really big creature, or use a Deathtouch creature, as we previously mentioned. Walls often have 0 attack, so your little newt could easily take down a castle wall all by himself. Defenders do still deal damage though, so in combat when they block, if they have more than 0 attack, like this wall of brambles, we can say goodbye to the newt. Next is First Strike, a static ability that edits the rules of the combat phase to give us 2 combat damage steps. In the first one, only creatures with First Strike deal damage. That means if your First Strike creature is blocked, it won't take any damage in this step unless the defending creature also has First Strike or Double Strike. After this combat step, state-based actions are checked, as well as combat damage triggers. Then, the non-First Strike creatures deal their damage. To defend against a creature with First Strike, you need a creature with higher toughness than the First Strike creature's attack, so it will survive the First Strike damage step. Or, use another creature with First Strike and trade. This segues very nicely into Double Strike. A creature with Double Strike deals damage in both First Strike combat and regular combat damage. If a creature with Double Strike has a combat damage trigger, it could trigger twice, but attack triggers will still only trigger once. To beat this, you either need a really big creature, or a creature with First Strike. Next is Flash, a static ability that allows you to play the card anytime you could cast an instant. To be fair, it is what it says it is. You can play your creatures mid-stack war, fuck it, why not? I guess the best part about Flash is one, it allows you to perform combat tricks. Let's say your opponent is attacking, you have no creatures, so there's literally no reason for them not to attack. You can flash in a creature during the declare attack step and then block with it straight away after your opponent has already declared and committed to their attacks. Also, it allows you to hold up interaction. You could be holding up mana for a counter spell, but if it gets to your opponent's end step without them doing anything you need to interact with, you can cast a creature instead so that mana isn't wasted. How do you beat this? You need to be aware of the cards in your format that you need to play around. Or in white, you can use stacks pieces like Voice of Victory to prevent your opponents from casting spells on your turn. There's a rule in Magic that can't always beats can. So if an opponent has a Vidalcan Orrery that says you may cast spells as if they had Flash, if you have a free fairy on the battlefield, you can't flash in spells as can't beats can. Flying, a nice simple one. Now this creature can't be blocked unless by creatures with flying or reach. It's just a static ability that makes the creature harder to block, called an evasion ability. How do we beat it? Have a creature with flying or reach. It's written right there in the rules text. Next up is Haste, which allows a creature to attack and activate abilities containing the tap or untap symbol as soon as it enters the battlefield. Fun fact, if you have a Pilipala with Summoning Sickness and you tap it to create a blue from an effect like Urza, you're not allowed to untap it with its untap cost while it's still got Summoning Sickness. I mean, it's not entirely relevant, but I just thought that was pretty cool. Anyway, how do you beat Haste? Well, Haste creatures don't affect the combat step at all, so you can block them as normal. But if they catch you by surprise, you can flash in a creature, or you can use stacks pieces like Authority of the Consuls or Blind Obedience. These white enchantments aren't triggered abilities, they're static abilities that create replacement effects, so these creatures actually enter tapped. So if an opponent has a haste creature with an activated ability with a tap cost, they won't be able to respond to these stacks pieces and get an activation off. Hexproof states that this permanent can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. If an opponent tries to destroy your creature, you can give it hexproof to prevent this. Since targets are checked when a spell goes to resolve, if between the time the spell was cast and it resolves the target was given hexproof, if it was the only target, the spell is removed from the stack. Otherwise, the spell still resolves but only affecting the legal targets. So how do we deal with hexproof creatures? We use an effect that doesn't target, board wipes, or forcing players to sacrifice creatures. Another thing, choosing isn't targeting. If your card doesn't explicitly say target, it gets around hexproof. Hexproof doesn't apply on the stack, so you can counter hexproof creatures before they get into play as well. Let's say an opponent has a hexproof creature, and they cast Assassin's Trophy targeting something on your board. You may cast a Redirect Lightning to point that Assassin's Trophy back to their hexproof creature. That creature is a valid target as your opponent controls Assassin's Trophy, so technically they are the ones targeting it. This wouldn't work with a card like Commandeer, as you are going to control the spell, so the creature is no longer a legal target as hexproof prevents it. Indestructible is a keyword that states damage and effects that say destroy don't destroy this. There are a few ways to kill an indestructible creature. One is by exiling. Exiled creatures aren't destroyed, they're exiled. Second, by forcing an opponent to sacrifice it. The third is through -X effects. This can be accumulated through -1/-1 counters or spells like Toxic Deluge. This works as the game sees damage and -X as different state-based actions. When a creature has lethal damage marked on it, the game sees it as an 8/8 creature with 8 damage marked. In normal play, the game would then destroy it as the damage marked is greater or equal to the toughness of the creature, but Indestructible states that damage doesn't cause it to be destroyed. -X effects, however, are not damage. When state-based actions are checked, the game sees that the creature has 0 or less toughness, so it dies. Die is actually an action meaning to put in the graveyard from play, and it is unrelated to destroy. So even though creatures can't be destroyed, they can still die. Lifelink. Damage dealt by this creature also causes you to gain that much life. Again, this isn't only for combat damage, so if you manage to give your Gutter Snipe lifelink, you'll be gaining a lot of life. The interesting thing with lifelink is how it causes other abilities to trigger. Let's look at Dina Soulsteeper. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. So let's say you resolve a Chaplain's Blessing to gain 5 life. Dina then triggers to make each opponent lose 1 life. Simple, right? But let's say you attack with 2 aerial responders. When combat damage is dealt, you gain 4 life without it using the stack. Then, afterwards, when awaiting triggers are put on the stack, Dina triggers twice, as each creature dealing combat damage is considered as a separate instance of you gaining life, even though you get it all at the same time. To prevent lifelink, there are various red effects that say players can't gain life. These are commonly played in Standard and Pioneer, etc. You can also use Infect or Commander damage to kill players regardless of their life total. Let's say your opponent's already amassed 1,000 life. Well, they're still going to die to Infect or Commander damage. Menace means that the creature can only be blocked by 2 or more creatures. Another very simple one. How do you deal with it? Have more creatures. Reach has no impact on the game other than being able to block creatures with flying. It functions exactly as a normal attacker and blocker, so play around it as if it was one. They're actually decent in limited, because having attackers with evasion abilities can be quite a big threat. Trample is a fun one. It allows excess damage to be dealt over blockers. A creature must assign lethal damage to all blocking creatures before assigning the rest to the player or planeswalker it is attacking. Trample is actually a hard one to get around other than just removing it. Combat tricks like blocking it and then sacrificing your creature doesn't work. The trample damage is calculated in the combat damage step. It assigns lethal damage to all blockers, which there now isn't any, and the rest is dealt to the player, so you end up taking all of it. I know this doesn't cover all your questions about Trample, but we'll cover Trample heavily in the next section. Vigilance is another very simple one. Attacking doesn't cause it to tap, so you can attack and then block with it after. Simple. In a situation like Loran, you can attack, block, and then activate her ability on your opponent's end step before she untaps at the beginning of your turn. Ward is our first non-static ability that we've come across. It's a triggered ability that triggers when it becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls. If the ward cost isn't paid, the spell or ability is countered, so it would trigger Baral, Chief of Compliance. To get around, it's very similar to Hexproof. You can use effects that don't target, such as board wipes, or technically you could stifle the ward trigger if you really had to, or just pay the ward cost. Keeping up with the triggered abilities, let's look at our first deciduous keyword, Prowess. Prowess is a triggered ability that gives a creature +1/+1 whenever you cast a non-creature spell. Note, Prowess still happens if the spell that caused it to trigger is countered. Also note that non-creature artifacts and enchantments also trigger Prowess. Prowess is great to use in combat as power and toughness can change dynamically after blocks are declared. Prowess is a hard one to get around, to be honest. You just need to play around it. If you see a creature with Prowess attacking you, you need to be prepared that the stats might change. Another thing I'd like to add is Prowess alongside Ward do stack if there are multiple instances of it. So if a creature has Prowess, like from Bria, or perhaps naturally, like in the case of Gitaxian Spellstalker, every non-creature you cast causes 2 Prowess triggers, which trigger separately but overall give +2/+2 per cast. The final thing I want to go over is protection. Protection is probably the most complicated keyword that prevents damage, enchanted and equip effects being blocked or targeted by anything of that characteristic. Again, like other abilities we've covered so far, this doesn't apply on the stack, so permanents with Pro Blue can still be countered. A lot of players use Debt to remember what protection does. To get around it, it's similar to other things that prevent targeting, so again, board wipes, except Blasphemous Act. Since Blasphemous Act is a red spell and it deals the damage, a pro-red creature will not take damage from it. However, a pro-white creature still dies from Wrath of God since it neither damages nor targets. Now onto the fun part, combat scenarios. The reason these situations confuse a lot of people is due to how damage is assigned and dealt. Dealing and assigning damage are done as 2 separate parts. Once you understand how to assign combat damage, the results make perfect sense. I'll start off simple and we'll work our way upwards in terms of difficulty. We'll start with First Strike and Deathtouch. Here, the First Strike creature does combat damage in the First Strike damage step. If it does lethal damage to the Deathtouch creature, the Deathtouch creature will die, and the First Strike creature will survive as the Deathtouch creature didn't deal any damage to it. If the Deathtouch creature didn't die, and we move on to the regular damage phase, the Deathtouch creature hits the First Strike creature, killing it. So what about Double Strike? What if the defender dies during the First Strike damage phase? Here, during the regular combat step, the Double Strike attacker deals no combat damage. It was still blocked. It's kind of no different to when you block with a creature and then sacrifice it. The creature isn't there anymore, but it was still blocked. However, if you have Double Strike and Trample on your attacker, you can assign lethal to the blocker and the excess to the player in the first combat damage step, and then you deal full damage in the second combat step. If the blocker doesn't die in the first combat step, you need to remember that damage is still marked until cleanup. So you deal as much damage as you can in the first combat step, then deal the remaining damage needed in the second combat step and the remainder to the player. Now onto the scenario I mentioned in the intro. Let's say you attack with a 3/3 Trample Deathtouch. The defender blocks with 2 2/2s. Without the Deathtouch, this is very simple. You can't assign lethal damage to all defenders, so no damage gets trampled to the defending player. Their total toughness is greater than your attack. However, with Deathtouch, 1 damage is considered lethal damage. So you can assign 1 damage to each of the defenders and then trample 1 damage over to the defending player. Your creature, however, will still die as it will have 4 damage marked against it at the end of combat. Continuing on with more Trample examples, replacing the 2 2/2s with an Indestructible creature. Indestructible prevents the specific state-based action that causes it to be destroyed from marked damage. the game still sees 2 damage as lethal damage. So you deal 2 damage and then deal 1 excess to the player. Then, when state-based actions are checked after normal combat damage, Indestructible prevents Tajic from being destroyed. Based on the last example, you might already know where this is going. When the Trample attacker also has Deathtouch, the game sees 1 damage as being lethal damage, so this time 2 damage will trample over, but again Indestructible prevents it from being destroyed. Replacing Indestructible with a protection creature creates a similar outcome but with some nuances. Protection prevents any damage from being dealt to the creature. Indestructible does not. An indestructible creature still has the damage marked against it, whereas the protection creature does not. This would matter with enchantments like Pain for All. The indestructible creature would then deal the damage to each opponent. A protection creature would not, as it never took the damage to begin with. You might be thinking, if protection prevents any damage, then surely 2 damage isn't considered lethal damage, so no damage would be trampled over. Well, the game doesn't see it like that. The rule 702.19b states what the game is considering when deciding what lethal damage is. See, in this list, it doesn't consider effects that modify or prevent damage anywhere. That's it for this video. Leave a comment telling me what other rules and interactions you'd like me to cover.